Throughout the day, do you feel that you are your authentic self? Think about that. Do you do you behave during the day, like when you go to work, when you talk to your family member, when you go to the grocery store? Are you living the most authentic self that you are? That's a good question. Now, keep in mind that we have to figure out what that means. Well, sometimes people say, well, when I think of authentic, I can think of authentic food. So I'm going to eat some Thai food or some authentic, authentic Mexican food, for example. These are good examples. Other ways is when you have a conversation with friends. Do you have an authentic conversation? So that brings us to the idea of what does it mean to be authentic? For me, to be authentic is when you are your real self. That means that you have a discussion, you bring ideas, you share information, but at the same time, you are sharing, you're sharing your victories, but also sometimes your failures. Sometimes when you have difficulties, uh, your when you create amazing things, but sometimes when you try but you don't succeed in what you're trying. So being authentic for me is when you are being yourself, but at the same time you're bringing that sense of vulnerability. What's the word? Vulnerability. There you go. So you are vulnerable when you share information to others. Now, I'm not saying that you have to share with people your secrets to so that people are curious. What I'm sharing is the fact that when you are sharing a story, being authentic, you are sharing the fact that at work today I was working on my project, and you know what, I had a great win. I was able to get a new client. On the other hand, it was hard because before I was able to get a new client, I had to do, I don't know, a dozen calls, and those resulted in rejections. So what it brings in the story is the fact that you can you you appreciate the wins, but you're also sharing what was difficult during the day. You're sharing the fact that you tried, you failed, but you persevere in what you were doing. It just shows that you are a leader in what you want to do, but also that you don't let little things or failures get in your way. This is what I think is it means to be authentic, because once you are authentic, then people see you as a human, a real person, and then there's a feel of connection that is possible. And I think that's what's most important when you are your authentic self. I have friends where, let's see, I have a friend in university. I remember she was authentic. So that means that when she was happy, you knew she was happy and she was amazing. When she was upset, you knew she was upset and she was amazing. When she was proud, she you could feel how proud she was, and that was what she was projecting. When she was sad, then she would cry, and you would know she would cry. She would cry at that time. This is what I call it. This is probably the best example of an authentic self. Whatever the person was sharing was the exact person of who she was. That was the real person at the time. I'm not saying that we all have to be real at all the time, because we have to hold on some of the emotions, I think, in public settings. Even though we always have friends and family members that are there for us when we need their help. Because you have to keep in mind that if you cannot be authentic, then then you're holding back on what you could do, on what you could be. And if you are with people that are not authentic, you are some coworkers or family members, then it's very hard to connect with them. And the idea is like, so what's the point sometimes to try to connect with someone when it's very hard to make connections, when there's not any authenticity on the person, something, so the feelings that can come from um, a friendship, for example. Okay, that's a good idea. So So the idea of authenticity is to make people feel that they are understood, but there are feelings attached to it so that you can feel that you can um, connect with that person. So I have a few examples with that. My three examples will be for me as a teacher, as a parent, but also in business. So three examples that could be interesting. The first example as a teacher is the fact that if a teacher is not authentic, then it's much harder for to create connections between the teacher and the students. I remember sometimes when I'm tired or I'm upset at something, and then I say, okay, I just do my lessons where it's very robotic. This is what we have to do it, and that's all we're gonna be. There's not interaction as to how I feel or how the student feels in this example. It's hard for students because if they see the teacher just talking in front of the class and there's no connection, students don't connect and they detach from the situation and learning is not possible. Learning in a classroom can only happen when there's a connection between the students and a teacher with respect to what is the topic that is being discussed during that day. So for example, if you think about ecosystems, for example, I was with my grade 9 students and we talked about different concepts and it was interesting. On the other hand, a couple of days later, we went outside and then the students who were outside there was a little creek by the school and they were out. Some of them went in the water a little bit. Some of them were in the forest. They picked up some sticks. They looked at the bugs. There was a little fish in the creek. So there was so much connection because there was a connection with what they could see and what they could experience. And guess what? When we went back to class, it was so much more easier to connect with the students because they had an experience and an experience outside in the ecosystem. So as I was giving the lessons, it was so much easier for both students and teacher to participate in the conversation. So that's something to keep in mind because students need to feel understood. And but the issue is that as a teacher, it's very hard to find a way to be understood by 30 different individuals. On the other hand, if you can create learning experiences that are similar, then connections could happen that way. And I think that is quite important. So connections are great that way. Then you could show that it's a good way. So when there's a good connection with a class, it works beautifully. And we're just thinking with the example where sometimes, most days, things are great. But sometimes, if there's times when I'm a bit grumpy in class, and the first thing I do is I just tell my students right away, guys today and gals, I I am grumpy. Just telling you right away. I'm taking it with a smile, but I'm grumpy. So usually the students can understand because they are grumpy in times too. And when the connection is there with students, most of the time we understand each other at that time, and students understand and they're on your side there because prior to that, you've been in a situation where you were there with your students and they felt understood, and therefore they also feel that you can feel that they understand you as a teacher. So that's quite nice. As a parent, the same thing happens. Too often if you think back in the I don't know, 50 years ago, when often there was a parent that stayed at school, there was a connection with a parent living at school, and one parent went out in the workplace, and often the connection between the kids and the parent going to the workplace was not as deep as the parent living at home, because often the relationship was much more impersonal for that parent. Parenting changed because often now two parents are involved with the raising of the kids, and therefore there's more communication and there's a more in-depth and authentic parenting relationship that happens. And I think that is quite important because children needs to feel understood. They need to feel listened to so that they know that you're there for them. You're like their anchor, their safe place. And if that's the case, then sometimes things are great and sometimes a bit tricky. On the other hand, together, when both parents and children are discussing, it's a great way to get better. I was trying to look for an example in business. And if you think of going to work, a few things happen. If you go to work, often I have three things here. You've got projects to do, you've got tasks to do, and deadlines, tasks, and projects. It's very impersonal. You know what you have to do. Some people are excited. They are self-motivated to achieve results, and that's wonderful. But for some, it's much harder. They need the connection with the people they're working with. And if you look at the different vocabulary that has come up over the years, uh, there was a time when I was working in the 90s, we were working with coworkers. Now we don't know not we don't talk about coworkers as much as team members. It's much more fun to talk about team members because you want to get to know your team members so that you can all get together to improve the situation for the projects, deadlines, and tasks. So uh, being uh, a colleague or a member is much more authentic than just being a coworker where you're just going to work to do what you have to do. But it takes different personality. There's a sometimes when all I want to do is I need to know what needs to be done, by when, and how it needs to get done. And sometimes the how I don't need to know it, but I just need to know what I need to do and I move forward. But sometimes, depending on the situation, I do appreciate having a team. I do appreciate to have other colleagues that have with which we can discuss about our wins, discuss about our struggles, discuss about failures, in which case the lessons learned, so that we can move forward. And that's why it's so important sometimes in a team or in life to have either a mentor or a coach sometimes, just to align some of the ideas, so that at some point you need to feel that you're a person within a group of different people. I think it's important. We often forget the human factor. And I think the human factor is that whole idea of what authenticity is. We're not robots, we are humans, and we need to keep that in mind. Maybe that's why AI is such a scary thing for some people. Uh, Artificial intelligence, we don't know how we can put it in context. We don't know how we can connect to them. It's very impersonal. Uh, it's hard to figure out how authentic they can be. But that's what, as human, we will achieve. On this, I hope that you have enjoyed that idea of authenticity. That is something I've been discussing the last couple of days and couple of weeks with colleagues, with friends, because often with this era of devices and the internet, people are losing that little touch of authenticity when we meet each other, when we work together, and when we have fun together. On this, I want to know what I want to know. In which environment or context do you feel the most authentic? For me, the most authentic time is when I go in for a hike and a walk in the forest, and I am with friends discussing, because the forest grounds me, and that's when I feel the most real person, and that's when the most real conversation can happen. And that's why I love to go outside with my science students as a way to learn and discuss and learn from each other. On this, I want to know what makes you feel the most authentic self, and I can't wait to read your comments. On this, I'm going to also link you to another video here once you have done your comments, and we'll talk about another topic of interest.